Hey, everybody, welcome to Head to Head, a Star Wars show where we talk about all things Star Wars. The High Republic novel and comic has been released, and this week we're going to review issue number 1 of the comic, and we're going to do it right now.
You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So, as we said, the High Republic novel and the comic have both been, I'll actually get it out one of these days, have both been released. And we're going to actually talk about the comic today because we haven't had time to read the... Did you even get the novel yet?
No, I haven't bought it yet, but I was actually going to, though.
Okay. You were going... I know, you're still probably trying to get through, like, Queen's Peril or whatever, but...
I know, right?
But basically, yeah, I ended up buying the novel, but the thing is that, you know, I mean, like I said, I ended up buying Queen's Shadow. I bought Queen's Peril. I haven't gotten to any of those yet. I'm right now reading the Thrawn Ascendancy book, so as soon as I'm done with that, I'm going to read the novel. But I did, and as you did too, end up reading the first issue of the comic that was released. Now, I should say right off the bat that, and hey, Ronaldo's with us. What's going on, Ronaldo?
What's going on, man?
So it's good that Ronaldo's with us because Ronaldo has actually been reading the novel. And what's interesting about it is I found out that if you're reading the novel, it has a bunch of stuff that will enrich the comic. So it's, in a way, I guess it's almost acting like a prequel or expands on more things or something. But apparently, if you've actually read the novel, the comic makes a little bit more sense. But I mean, I don't know about you. I was okay with it. It wasn't like it really confused me or anything like that.
No, it didn't confuse me. It kind of starts off in a weird kind of space to me, but it was cool.
Yeah, well, and I think that that's one of the things that's really interesting about this, and was one of the questions that we had was, how are they going to begin this? Because one of the concerns that I had is that you're basically being introduced into this brand new era with brand new characters. And sure, you get Master Yoda, but other than that, everybody's new. So it becomes a situation of, hey, you know, where are you going to put us in there? I mean, how are you going to frame this? Are you going to say, you know, okay, here's the High Republic and it's just beginning? Or are you going to do what it looks like they've done, and that's just drop us right in the middle of this thing?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it kind of does just drop you in the middle of this world, and you have no idea where you are, who these people are, and you know what they're doing there. And sometimes it's been a while, but like sometimes like the boxes are kind of hard to read as far as like which one goes where, or which one are you supposed to read at the, you know, so do you read this box first or
Are
the
you
bubble
reading?
first?
Are you reading it digitally?
Yeah.
So if you double tap the phone
Mm-hmm.
or whatever you're reading it on, it'll actually zoom in, and then if you just swipe, it'll automatically go to the next box.
No, that part is no. I mean, not that box.
Yeah, that was a tutorial, everybody, on how to read a digital comic book.
No, not that box. I was more so referring to the, like, you know, sometimes they have like the green box in the thing, and then you have like the words, and so sometimes it kind of, you just don't know which one to kind of lead off with first. You kind of get the hang of it, you know, eventually.
Absolutely. We got a couple more people that have joined us. Bowright Family of Comics says, hey guys, stopping by to say hi. I will be listening. And then, of course, Joanne Vansel says, hi guys. And then Bowright's like saying hi, Joanne and Ronaldo. So basically, the gang's all here.
Right.
You know, and hopefully more people will be joining us as we're giving this review. But it is really interesting. So let's do it like this. What were your overall thoughts of the comic and then maybe the High Republic era as a whole as we're being introduced to this so far?
Okay. Overall, I thought it was okay. It's not like it was like, wow, this is amazing to me yet. It was just kind of like, okay, just trying to figure out where we are, what we're doing. But my overall, it was like I said, my overall opinion of it was good. some of these characters' names are going to be interesting to get used to.
Oh, you know what? First of all, I'm glad you brought that up because I got to say this to anybody that's watching this live now or is watching the rebroadcast. I don't want to hear anything in the comics about these names. I'm telling you right now, I'm going to screw a lot of these names up. Or it's not even that I'm going to mess them up. Maybe I won't mess them all up, but in some cases, I'm going to be like, okay, who's the guy again? I mean, it's going to take a minute for me to,
Yeah.
to learn some of these, especially because, and this is the thing about a comic book is that you're basically introduced to this thing in a very small window of time. And I think that your opinion reflects that because I think that once we read the novel, and I'm not even talking about the fact that the novel's actually going to make the comic make more sense, but I think that just overall, when you're reading the novel, you actually get this big chunk, right? You're really introduced. I can give you a great example of that. The Thrawn Ascendancy novel that I'm reading. It's a very similar thing in the sense of it's not so much that you're in a different time period, but what it is that you're thrown into this different world. It's in the unknown regions. We haven't really dealt with that too much. And then on top of that, it's all brand new characters, same kind of deal. You got to learn all these names, and they're Chiss names, so they're a little bit more challenging. And it's basically kind of the same thing. You're trying to get your bearings. You're trying to figure out where am I in this whole thing, right? So if you're reading it in the novel form, it's not as bad. But I have a feeling that in the comic, because it's just such a, like it's a, I mean, I'm not to say that, comics are really, like you're not really being shortchanged or anything like that, but you are being introduced in a smaller chunk of this world. It's different if you're reading the Darth Vader comic or the Star Wars or, any of the other series where it's a familiar character, familiar worlds, familiar planets, that kind of thing. You're dropped in the middle, and all you have to do is figure out where it is in the saga. And once you do that, you can start to make connections, and it's not so bad. But in something like this, you're being dropped into just like a completely different world, basically. Because I don't know if you notice this or not, but even the universe doesn't really look like the Star Wars universe.
No, it kind of has some weird, like I said, it has that Themyscira vibe to it. It has some like it definitely has that King Arthurish look to it.
Yeah, which I think is
like one of the characters. I want to call her Guinevere all of a sudden, it's just
absolutely. I mean, well, and to their credit, that is what they were going for. So
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I don't
they
necessarily think
definitely
it's a
nailed
bad
that.
thing.
Yeah, I mean it's a different look for Star Wars, and so that's where I'm, like I said, just trying to get myself in that mindset or that space to really like accept that this is the world, and having Yoda there does kind of
It
ease
softens the
things,
blow, definitely.
but and I think that was probably definitely done intentionally. But I think, like I said, overall, like the characters are kind of interesting. I wonder if we're going to get backstory on some things later on.
Well, again, I don't think that you can. I don't necessarily know that that's going to happen in the comics. I think that's going to be more the books because you have to remember that this is going to be sort of like
a companion. It's like a companion type thing.
Pretty much. I mean, they had basically said from the get-go that this was going to be world building that was basically going to be done, at least at first. I mean, we know they're going to eventually do movies and TV series on this, but at first anyway, it's going to be like, look, it's going to be books and it's going to be comics. And like you said, I think one is going to inform the other. In fact, we've already seen that with the first book and the first comic issue, is the fact that, as I said, I haven't read the book yet, but from what I've read about it in several reviews, if you actually read the novel first, then the comic makes a lot more sense.
Gotcha.
Like, for instance, here we go with the names. Avra Chris or whatever. Okay.
Avar.
Yeah, she's like, she was basically made, All right. Point for me. It was pretty close. So she was basically made like the the captain or commander
Marshall.
or whatever of Starlight Beacon, right?
Mm-hmm.
So apparently they set that up in the novel. So
Mm-hmm.
she actually is officially appointed in this first issue, but basically if you're just reading the comic like you and I, you're you get it. Again, you don't actually have to read the book in order to appreciate or enjoy the comic, but I have a feeling that this is going to be a lot like Catalyst
Catalyst.
leading into Rogue One.
One.
That if you do read the book before you read the comic, that you're going to get a lot more enjoyment out of it. It might enrich it. It'll inform certain things that happen in the comic that, if you're just reading the comic, you'll be like, oh, okay, that's cool. It's not like you're lost. It's not like you don't understand what's going on. But you do get that sense like you're coming in the middle of the story somewhere, though.
Yeah.
Definitely with this first issue.
Yeah, Boatwright has a comment. He says, my shop was sold out when I went to get it. I have not had a chance to read it yet. So hopefully, I don't know if he cares about spoilers or anything like this.
No, if he did, he would have commented that, because every time we do this and he hasn't seen, like, particularly The Mandalorian, he'll just be like, you know what, guys, I'm out
of here.
I'll catch this on the rebroadcast. I promise I'll watch it, but I'm gonna have to do it on the rebroadcast. So if he's hanging around, and again, I mean, with a comic like this, I don't necessarily think that there's anything. I mean, I don't really think that you can spoil it. First of all, if you're clicking on this in the first place, it's a review. And I guess you could give a non-spoiler review, but I don't know. I don't really equate it the same as a movie.
Right. Okay.
I mean, just because I don't know. But let me give you my overall thoughts really quick. And then, I mean, Ronaldo's got something I'm sure other people might chat in. But I kind of felt the same way, except I did actually really respond to this right away.
Okay.
But I think a lot of that is the fact that I've had so long to prepare myself, knowing what I was getting into. I knew that this was going to be a little bit more like a King Arthurian type, world that they were building, that this is definitely during the zenith of the Jedi. Like, I think that they actually did a really good job in setting up what to expect from this series. And I mean both the book and the comic. I'm actually really curious now, more than ever, to read the novel, because it's one of those things that I think that, as you get into this, I think a lot of the world building that we're going to need is definitely going to come from the novel. Now, I will also say, though, that the comic is a really good companion, because what it does is it gives you a little bit more of a window into what this world looks like, at least to Lucasfilm and, the writers and stuff.
Yeah, that's one thing I can't say is that what makes this kind of really cool is that when you have this book and you're reading this stuff and you're kind of imagining it in your head, but then you have a comic that kind of illustrates it for you.
Right.
So it's kind of like, okay,
Well, it's one of those things, I think, that what it does is when it illustrates it like that, now you can start to imagine what a movie or a series might look like.
Mm-hmm.
Because these are the same guys that are basically making it, so it's almost like, because that happens a lot of times, is that you get a picture in your head, and then when you see the movie, it's kind of like, it's not quite exactly what I expected. And this is especially true if you're reading something that's like more of a sci-fi fantasy nature, because you're pretty much, it's all in your imagination. It's all in your mind. I mean, you can read about a world or whatever, but you give 10 different filmmakers the same thing, the same description, you're going to see 10 different things. Where I think it really helps to pretty much be on the same page. So, yeah, I think that the other thing that I responded to in this overall, if we're talking overall thoughts, I really love the humor in this thing. Like, they were making some really hilarious, and again, it's almost like The Mandalorian in the sense of it's jokes that you would actually make if you were in that situation.
Right.
Definitely. like when, Kryve is talking about the two Zimpi that basically, first she has to deal with the one.
Mm-hmm.
And like Kavi, I think his name is, or something, and then like his wife or something.
Oh, yeah. His wife shows up.
Yeah. And then Kryve is all like,
oh, great, it's 2 of them now.
Yeah, and then she's like, the Force must really have it in for me or something like that.
Yeah.
That's kind of a realistic joke. That's realistic dialogue to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's one of those things that, I really think that I'm going to respond to the humor because there was actually humor throughout the entire thing, completely. So overall, I think that I understood what was going on. I basically understood where it was fitting in because, as we know, Starlight Beacon and then this unseen enemy or something that we had always read about. I basically understood where they were coming from and where this is in the story, even though, unlike when you're seeing episode 4, in a way it's weird because with episode 4, you're dropped into this world for the first time, right? So you have no idea what to expect. But what's interesting about this issue is that it's a similar thing, that you're being dropped in the middle of a story, but I don't really know how much before and after, it's going to be really interesting to see all the setup. That's why I'm really curious to read The Light of the Jedi because, especially since they're going to be releasing the second book in another month, I don't want to fall too far behind. So let's go to some of this. Ronaldo's got a few comments here. It seemed like a good start to me. It's not the best I've ever read, but it checked all the boxes to read the next issue. And I think that that's a really good point here, is the fact, and again, we're going to get into the actual story and some of the stuff, but overall, we're still talking about overall thoughts. I think that that's a great point, is that a lot of times with Star Wars, a lot of fans have come to expect now that, you have to make some super monumental thing every time. Whereas really what they did was exactly what they needed to do. Give us a good story, give us something that captures our interest, that checks off the boxes, like Ronaldo says, and then simply makes us want to read the next one. Now, I don't remember exactly. I know book-wise how they're doing it. I don't know how far apart they're doing the comics, because with a lot of the Star Wars comics, they seem to come monthly.
Yeah,
So
I know the next book, I think, is the 26th of February, I think.
Okay, so it is pretty much monthly. Because, and that's the other thing, too, is that because it's not weekly, I kind of miss the days of when I was growing up, how comics were weekly.
Mm-hmm.
But, I get it. And not to mention the fact that this isn't like Spider-Man where it just goes on infinitely. Or like the Star Wars, the main comic series, where they basically keep putting it out and then, they just flip to another area of the story. This is a limited edition series. I think it's like, 6 issues or something? It's like 6 or 9 or something like that. It's basically a series that is fairly limited in scope. So it makes me wonder where they're going to go from there, too, because it's not just going to be, okay, here's this, and now they're done. They're going to go to another section. Ronaldo also says, there are some very interesting details about Avar Kriss, the blonde Jedi, and Keeve's ship model that are not mentioned in the comic but are mentioned in the book. And yeah, that's the thing. Like I said, Avar Kriss, I know she was like she gets appointed to Starlight Beacon. She doesn't actually think that she's going to be the one, at least according to what we see in the comic, but I know that's expounded upon in the book, so it's going to be really interesting to read that. And then he says, by the way, if you found it difficult to remember the names of the characters in the comic, believe me, the book is more complicated. There are many more characters. Oh, good. So basically, I'm going to need like a Lord of the Rings style, bibliography or glossary. Yeah, exactly, in order to keep all these people straight. But you know what? Like I said, I'm pretty much a veteran of reading the novels. So for some reason, and I think it's because in a novel, because the novels are actually longer, you're living with the characters more. See, I think that's one of the other things, too, that's different about this comic. I'll probably be able to remember the characters for the most part once I'm reading the book, because I'm going to have like 600 pages or something to keep having these characters like pretty much rammed in my head. Whereas the comic, you're reading like 20 or 30 pages, with like maybe 6 to 8 panels or something per page, and then boom, you're done. And the other thing, too, is that it's new. I remember that was one of the things that I always experienced when the prequels came out and then the sequel trilogy came out. The first thing that you think of is like, oh, man, there's going to be like a million more characters I got to try to remember now. But then
Right.
you do. When you're spending time in that world, you start to actually pretty much commit these things to memory because you get invested in them. And once you're invested in the characters, that's one of the things that I think helps you not only to remember the names, but enhances your enjoyment. And I think that that's one of the things that this issue did for me was Skier, who is like the Jedi Master, basically. It's like Keeve's
Master.
Keeve's Master. She's the Padawan to him.
Mm-hmm.
So you get a little bit of that. Like I was invested in these characters right from the get-go, which I think is cool. So now that we have basically our overall thoughts out of the way, why don't we go ahead? Daryl, I know you got, a lot of this information up. At least I hope you do. If not, this is your cue. Why don't you walk us through? I know we basically start out where we're pretty much in the middle of a Jedi trial.
Okay. Yeah. So, this comic kind of starts off with Keeve. She's on this planet, and as she's, going around, she's trying to focus herself into the Force. And this little fly like thing keeps literally nagging her with like all these questions about like, oh, are you a Jedi? Are you this? I could tell by your laser sword or your light sword. And, it was almost like a little baby Anakin almost.
Yeah, well, that was the one in Friday's show. That was what I was talking about when I said it reminded me of the Great Gazoo from the Flintstones. Is the fact that it's like this little thing, this little being,
Fly,
that basically
He reminds me of Bastard Stockman from the Ninja Turtles.
Well, I mean, the funny thing is that everything. I thought that was a really interesting way to begin the comic too. Like I did not expect that to be the case.
Exactly. And she's in the midst of, just kind of walking around, and she senses something in the Force. And so he's like, of course he's oblivious to what the Force is. He thinks it's like some magic thing and wants to see tricks and stuff. But meanwhile, she's trying to focus, and it's kind of annoying her. But out of nowhere, this creature, just rains down on her with a lightsaber. And so then they begin to have this duel. And come to find out that it's actually her master.
Now that's
testing her.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And just so we see a little bit, this is that shot that we were talking about, with Keeve and the little Zimpy named Canry. That's pretty much the scene that it's set. And I mean, I love this lightsaber. Basically, like I said on Friday's show, and here it is. It's a thinner blade, or at least a thinner hilt, I should say. But the lightsabers in this were really fascinating to me because they look different, even though they're the same. And they're not as different as I expected them to be based on the explanations that we were getting.
Well, I mean, like I said, I think it fits the time period, one. And then we haven't seen them all. Like the one thing I noticed about her lightsaber is that it breaks apart.
Yeah.
So it's almost like she can use it as two single blades, or she can combine it and make the dual blade. So she's kind of. But the thing that was kind of crazy was that like her master is actually fighting with one arm.
Yeah. Now here's Scare, and this is actually coming from the second issue, but this gives you an idea how ferocious this guy looks. I mean,
he looks like Bosk.
He does. And honestly, that's what it reminded me of when I first saw it. I'm like, this kind of reminds me of Bosk as a Jedi.
Right.
Which it is. Bosk is a Trandoshan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is the same species. So, I mean, that was kind of cool to see a Trandoshan Jedi, just like, we're going to see a Wookiee Jedi, even though the expanded universe actually had that. They've had Wookiee Jedis and stuff like that, particularly one, I believe, that was in Luke's Academy. But it's nice to see that seeping into the official canon now.
Yeah. So, I mean, pretty much the whole overall story is that um, he's kind of preparing her for the Jedi trials. And so basically says, all right, I'll put this pendant on top of this like really, really, really high needle type tree thing. And
Mm-hmm.
she has to kind of climb up there and go get it and face her fears and, pretty much go through the whole Jedi trials. And in the midst of that, there's like this crazy attack by these giant, like mutated, look like flies or moths or
Yeah,
dragonflies. I
man.
don't
I
know what
mean,
the heck
these
those
like
things
crazy
were.
flying insects. Honestly, if I had seen that, I
Yeah.
probably would have died of shock right then and there.
Yeah, I would have had to definitely whip out the lightsaber for that one. But it kind of reminds me like a giant those Geonosians.
Yes. Yes. That's exactly what it kind of looked like to me too. But they look menacing though. They had like these red eyes and
Yeah.
you
It's
know, I
actually
mean
like
it was
Gossamer had wings. That's
yeah. I mean
basically
it was kind of like it basically almost had like a Tremors vibe to me where, it's almost like a creature type of a thing and it rises up and it attacks when you least expect it. Which I did like where they ended up going with the story. It kind of reminded me a little of the whole space whales thing from Rebels,
Mhm.
or maybe something that you would see on Star Trek. Kind of actually, this whole plot had somewhat of a Star
Yeah,
Trekky,
I definitely got that vibe too.
vibe to it. But
Yeah, so I mean, she's of course now, um, now her goal was to retrieve this pendant from the top of this one little needle, but then now because these bugs have attacked, they're attacking little Cahill's homeworld or his home city, and so they basically trying to figure out like, well, what's the cause of this? So while that's going on, they kind of flash over to um, the beacon. And now you kind of see inside the beacon, and you see one guy looks like Zeb actually from Rebels, and
mhm.
he's kind of like the tech guy. And then they had, of course, Avar Chris. She's kind of running things like that. Master Yoda and Grandmaster Yoda and Vetter show up.
Yeah, and this is again. I mean, I love seeing this because if you look at this shot, it's cool how they did Yoda. I think.
Hmm.
I was really skeptical about how Yoda would look, but he comes in sort of strutting in, and I really like that they drew him a little younger, but it's not that much younger. And then of course Vetter looks pretty cool too, kind of
Yeah.
intimidating and wise and
So apparently, Yoda is the Mace Windu of this series.
yeah, that's kind of what it looks like. And that,
He's the
what,
second
that
in
makes
command.
sense. That actually makes sense. I remember you and I were talking about this on one of our other
Mhm.
shows where, at first we were up in arms because we didn't even think he was going to be on the council or even a master yet. And it's like, okay, I can hang with that if this were, maybe like 800 years ago,
Mhm.
where
Or
Yoda's only a couple hundred years old. And I mean,
or at
we
the end of
know,
the Old Republic era or something
yeah,
like that.
exactly. Well, maybe a little because I think the Old Republic was like 10,000 years before, but
Well, yeah, that's right.
just a little further back, because we know that Grogu is basically like 50 years old or whatever, and he's practically a toddler. So if Yoda were like, say, 200, 300 years old, that's probably really like a serious, I'm in my prime kind of thing. Even though, don't get me wrong, he's no slouch here either.
Right.
But it's only a couple hundred years back, though,
Yeah.
But still, I really liked the illustration. I liked the way they drew him out. I liked all the stuff about him that at least we've seen so far. I mean, because, granted, we haven't, he's basically in a room talking. So, I mean, it's not like we've seen much. But you could see a little bit about Yoda's personality, a little bit of his humor. And I did like the fact, like you said when you were giving your overall thoughts, that we basically need Yoda to give us a sense of familiarity here.
Hmm. Yeah, he's kind of like the pivotal. He's the hinge or the pivot point, with all this because he's been around the longest. And
Well,
this,
he's also the bridge too, because
yeah, doesn't yeah.
he was around, and it's kind of like he's basically the bridge to And basically what's going to happen is, not that I know anything plot-wise about what's going to happen, but one of the things that strikes me is the fact that I think you're going to look at Yoda's character differently when you watch the prequels and the original trilogy once this whole series kind of wraps up, or at least once we're further enough into the High Republic, because I think it's going to give us a little bit more backstory. We're going to see why Yoda is the way he is. And that's definitely in the High Republic novel, too. I think that the other thing that I was reading is that you find out a little bit what Yoda's deal is, because he's basically going around on a ship teaching younglings or something.
Yeah, she actually wasn't. Avar Chris wasn't expecting either one of them, and so when they showed up, at first she actually thought she was actually getting appointed to the council.
Right. Right.
And then
now, who was the guy that was almost like the Mara something, or guy in the chair?
Oh, Zeb looking guy.
Yeah, the Zeb looking guy.
I don't have his name at the moment.
Yeah, I'm sure Ronaldo knows. And speaking of Ronaldo, he says, I know it's only the first issue, but did you think the Jedi have a better sense of unity in this era than in the prequels? Absolutely. But you have to remember, before you get too hard on a lot of this stuff, is that the idea of this whole era is to show the Jedi at pretty much at their peak, at their zenith. This is when they were the most effective. Because you have to remember, when we meet them in the prequels, it's kind of the tail end. And as we were talking about Friday, pretty much they're having to be generals. This is the reason why Palpatine was able to block their connection to the Force, which if you guys didn't see, I'll leave a link to Friday's show in the comment section. But one of the things that we dealt with was, why was Palpatine able to block the entire Jedi Order from connecting to the Force and really understanding what was going on? Well, in this era, they're fully connected to the Force. I mean, this is when they are pretty much, like I said, at their peak. So it stands to reason that they're going to have a better sense of unity.
Yeah.
Oh, he said Master Maru. Yeah, Maru. See, I kept saying Mara. See, I'm thinking Mara Jade probably.
Yeah.
But he also says, I need to see that shot of the Jedi raising their swords in a movie. That looked really cool. And then he also says, I like the phrase for light and life. And that's it. I mean, you get kind of a warm vibe. I mean, even in the scene that we're talking about, right, where Maru is talking to Vetter and Yoda and Chris. I mean, it's like the way that everything's going down, the way that they're speaking to each other, the way that they're interacting is completely different than what we're used to.
Yeah,
and it seems a little lighter too. I don't know.
Well, yeah, it's not during war times. I mean, you can still see there's a sense of regality. I mean, that's just the best way to really explain it. Yeah. And so, Var Chris is under the impression that they're about to ask her to be on the council, but they say no. They actually want her to be the marshal because they were looking for one the whole time, and they actually decided that she should be the marshal of Starlight Beacon. And then, of course, going through this whole process, Creve is actually trying to, save this one particular time. She had an objective, but she forewent that and decided to try to help save, this whole town. What she ended up doing, of course, she was able to keep her wits about her, actually being able to figure things out, use the Force to kind of figure out that like Starlight Beacon was actually the one that kind of summoned these things because it was picking up all these like frequencies from it.
Yeah, I thought that was a great thing. Now, I should probably point out, so this is Starlight Beacon, at least kind of a closer shot of it. And essentially, Starlight Beacon was something that was put out in the unknown regions in order to like send out a signal and help guide people, or just to help them sort of navigate the area, and maybe even to reach out to other beings or whatever, kind of like a hey, welcome, we're here kind of thing.
It's like a little outpost, really.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what is so cool, and I know it's going to factor in pretty heavily into this whole era, at least into the initial plot lines. And that whole, they're looking for a marshal for Starlight Beacon was actually heavily dealt with in the Light of the Jedi book, the first High Republic novel. That's another way that Yoda, a little bit of these other things. This is how it informs the comic a little more. So if you're reading the comic after you read the book, you're going to be like, "Oh, cool." It's almost like it basically in the book apparently it happens. If it were a movie, we would say off screen. So it kind of happens off page, they don't deal with it. You know that that's what's going to happen, but they don't talk about it. So what they do is they pick up pretty much in the comic, and then they show you that scene, which I think is a really nice thing that they're doing, where something will happen in a book, and then they'll pick it up in a comic, which is basically fulfilling the promise that they had been telling us, which further shows, you knew I had to bring it up, if you're going to do something, have a plan, right? This is what happens when you plan something out. Things have cohesion. And cohesion in a universe as big as Star Wars is a really nice thing. So, yeah.
Yep.
We find out that the bugs are attracted to the Starlight Beacon.
Yep. She's, has to try to save the day, which she eventually does. Meanwhile, she's trying to find her master. Her master's kind of disappeared on her, so she's trying to wonder, what happened to him. But there's some darkness kind of in him, and we actually find out that we've already experienced our first death without actually seeing it. Now they may actually reveal it in the book, but as far as the comic, one of the Jedi Masters actually died at the hands of the Nile, and that's also how Shirk or is that how you pronounce his name? Shirk
or Shriek or
Shriek, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. That's how he lost his arm, in combat fighting them. And so that people think of like maybe there's some darkness kind of surrounding that whole loss, that sense of loss of his arm and even losing that master. But I think they all believe that there's something more to his story.
Well, I mean, and the thing is if this were on the police force or whatever, they'd be mandatory psych counseling or something, that
Right.
When you have an injury like that, you got to go into mandatory counseling for stuff like that. And that's another thing that I really enjoy about this particular series so far. And again, look, we're one issue deep. You can't be too critical, but you also can't praise it too much yet either.
Right.
That's another temptation that we have is sometimes if we enjoy something or we feel like they're on the right track with something, we'll start praising it to death. And it's like, well, put the brakes on. It's one book, one issue. Let's not go too crazy yet. But I will say that it is off to a great start, though, because it's one of those things that they're dealing with some of these issues, some of the details of this. So it's not just, yay, the Jedi are, at their peak of their power and, this is going to be really great and stuff like that. You're basically also saying, look, we're going into a little bit of character development here. We're going into a little bit of the minutia and some of the details. And I think that is a really cool thing that they're doing. And this is a good example of that. Shriek loses his arm and, or Skier, I think, actually, is his name. But he loses his arm. I'll get these names right, guys. And pretty much everybody's kind of like, yeah, but, he has to deal with this. And like you said, there's some darkness going on. And there's just some stuff, you could tell that even though this had kind of a Star Trek-ish sort of, these bugs are attracted to something that we're doing, so we're going to have to try to do something to fix that, right?
Right.
They're dealing with some of the things, even though it seems like a little bit more of a fluff plot, they're setting things up underneath that they're going to deal with in future issues. And actually, let me just put this up. This is from the second issue. So that there's some stuff that's going to go down here. Skier looks a little angry. So it's going to be really interesting to see what it is they actually do.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess, now that Keeve has kind of returned back to Starlight Beacon, she, of course, runs into her master, very apologetic because she's like, "Yeah, I know I was supposed to get this pendant. I kind of failed my trial. I'm sorry." She's really just kind of beating herself up about a lot of different things. And as she's walking with this master, she's summoned to this room where eventually we see Avara Chris kind of like in all of her glory. And, she's kind of like starstruck and freaking out of who she is and who she's standing in front of, because apparently Avara Chris is like this giant not want to say war hero, but this kind of this big time hero. And what we also kind of find out about Kiev is that she has a bit of a language problem.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, she swears a lot. Now, granted, for anybody, it's not the traditional Earth-like swear words.
Yeah, right.
But it's the Star Wars equivalent, apparently.
Right.
And yeah, she can't say like two things without, unleashing these things, right?
Yeah, some sort of, expletive, if you will. So, but she's just kind of like awed and starstruck, at who and she's even apologizing to her, like, I'm sorry that I know I was supposed to do better. Maybe I can retake it again. And then, they could all kind of looking at her very sternly and it's like, are you finished? Are you done? So she kind of really feeling crappy now. So she just eventually just shuts up. And then Avar ignites her lightsaber and basically knights her and, cuts off the braid, makes her a full on Jedi Knight. And she didn't realize the whole time that, she was being tested, especially dealing with her patience, her focus, selflessness, because she, although winning the Jedi trials was very important to her, there was a greater good of saving that little town. And, that's what the Jedi are all about. And so the fact that she saved that instead of that's kind of what pushed her over.
Well, and one of the things that I thought was cool is that, we always thought, and this is the only thing that was really demonstrated to us in basically the prequels especially, is the fact that it seemed like the only way that you could test out of the trials is if you face and beat a Sith Lord. Right? But this kind of showed us that, no, I mean,
you could test out so long as you're dealing with things that a Jedi would have to deal with. And that's why you can test out what beating a Sith Lord, because you have to deal with fear, anger. You have to deal with...
Well, that's kind of the advanced level, So, I mean, exactly. It's sort of like, okay, if you can actually defeat a Sith Lord and you're pretty much around to talk about it, then, yeah, we're going to give you a pass. I'm pretty sure you could do this. But, I mean, what's funny about it, though, to me, is the fact that even though you had a situation where they're in the middle of the trials or doing all this stuff and something else happens, it's cool to see that it's not like, oh, you have to go and take this academic test, basically. And by that, I don't mean like paper and pencil or pen or anything. I mean, like, this is a particular exercise that you have to do to test. That the Jedi weren't, it seemed like, I'll tell you what, it seemed like they weren't quite as dogmatic back then. And that's why I have a feeling that we're going to see in the coming issues and coming novels and stuff like that.
Yeah, their philosophies.
Yeah, like how did it get there? And Yoda being the character who was basically the bridge, and so he was around, so Yoda's running things since he is basically the guy on the council. He's pretty much running things the way that he's doing it because he sees that it's necessary. So it makes you wonder what happened during the High Republic era, because even though it's a couple hundred years, it's only a couple of generations. I mean, we're not talking a super long time. Mm-hmm. I mean, before the High Republic era was introduced, you had the Old Republic, but now you're talking like 10,000 years. I mean, anything can happen. But now you have an era that's happening. It's far enough away that you can do some different and interesting things, but it's close enough that era is going to have ramifications on the era that we know, which, by the way, the other thing that they do, and I'm assuming they did this in the book too, but in the comic, they give you the timeline. They give you the whole new timeline and what movies fit and all this other stuff. So let's get to some more chat, which is, at the moment, all Ronaldo. He basically says, I heard some complaints about it, but did you find Keith's swearing problem annoying? I thought it was funny. Yeah, it was funny because it's not something that you generally see, but yet it would make sense if you have kind of this like high strung, Jedi. He goes on to say, ever since I saw the insects attack that city, I predicted that Kiev was going to be knighted, not for the trials, but for saving the city. And he's talking about that's a complaint that was predictable, wasn't a big complaint, but still enjoyed the story. And that's the thing, is that even though, yes, it was a little bit predictable, and that's where it also kind of gets into the Star Trek thing too a little bit, where you can see where it's going. And that's not to say that all, lest any Star Trek fans are watching this, that's not to say that every Star Trek thing is predictable, because in a lot of cases it isn't. I remember watching plenty of Star Trek or Star Trek The Next Generation or any of the other ones where I really didn't have any idea where it was going. But for the most part, there's always that moral of the story. There's always that thing that they're discovering and learning. And I think that that's the same thing you're going to find here with the High Republic. That it's not about unpredictability.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you could see the writing on the wall that she was going to become a knight. Either not this issue, but maybe made a couple of more, and she would have been made a knight. But just the whole ceremony of it all was very,
that
elegant.
was pretty cool, man.
Yeah, that's the one Ronaldo wants to see, and they kind of have this whole little kind of like saying and slogans that they have going on, and
absolutely
for light and life, and I could actually hear like her saying, by the powers invested in me type, thing.
What would have been classic is if they like brought it out by the power of Grayskull.
Yeah. And so,
it was heartwarming.
Cool. Yeah, and she, you saw they actually drew like the tear running down her face, and she was just like, "Wow, I actually did it. I completed the trial," and she actually made it to, and then she's joined by other, what looks like to be other young knights or future knights.
Dear future knight. And it really is a heartwarming thing. I mean, there's so much negativity in the world that it's kind of nice when I think that that's where it really hits, because it's not something we're used to seeing in Star Wars, because like you said, we were dealing like a wartime situation, or, there's always like some major conflict. It's never just a heartwarming, nice story. And I think that was one of the things that they were trying to do, particularly with this issue, is set up a couple of things that they're going to deal with probably as a long-running story arc, like Skier's darkness or something that's going on, and with the Nile and all that. But the other thing that I think they were trying to do is like, look, this is your introduction to the High Republic. Let's give you a nice, self-contained, maybe somewhat predictable feel-good story. And let me ask you this, and, you guys that are watching live, or, and, you want to leave a comment in the comment section, please do so. Do you think that they're going to handle all this stuff like this, or do you think that, okay, this is how Kiev got knighted, but we know there's other Padawans?
Yeah, I think what we're going to see is various stories of how other Padawans get to a point where they've all reached knighthood, and some people have had everybody's going to have a different test or a different trial in order to get there. So I think we're really going to see that. I think we're really going to see the cool thing about this particular episode, but
this whole issue. But I mean, you could look at it like an episode, I think.
Yeah, is that when you look at things, Ronaldo asked the question brought the statement up earlier about unity. And one thing I really got out of this is that everybody is at the place where they're willing to play their part for the necessary good of the order, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So Yoda, he had to come back because his path no longer lied where he had to go. He went where he needed to go. The same thing happened with Avar Chris. She thought she was going to go to the council, or they were going to ask her to join the council. Nope, we asked you to be the marshal. She's like, okay, I guess I'm going to be the marshal then. And then
right, there was no Anakin like, you know what, I deserve to be on the council, I'm better than half of you. I'm like, obviously somebody big, because this other Padawan practically wet her pants in meeting her. So it's kind of like,
Yeah.
okay, it's going to be really interesting to see,
And
her
then,
story.
yeah, then with Keith, saying she, did what was best for not herself, but for the big picture.
Hmm.
And once again, it's all about serving. It's all about that serving the community or serving the galaxy in the best capacity in which you can. And I think that's what's really the theme of this particular issue.
Yeah, and I also think that in telling all these different stories, right? So, like we said, you have a lot of Padawans. Not every Padawan is going to have their knighthood or whatever wrapped up in one little tiny adventure in an issue. There
Hmm.
could be some that maybe it's wrapped over a couple of issues, maybe it's over a couple of novels, maybe it's like really long. I mean, the thing that's cool is that by introducing us to all these main Jedi Knight and Padawan characters, which we really haven't seen since the Clone Wars. That was one of the things that was interesting about the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars, even though in the movies, in Attack of the Clones, we meet, well, really, you can go, let me backtrack here. You can go back to the Phantom Menace, and that's the first time that we meet somewhat main Jedi Master characters, right? Besides Mace, obviously, and then, of course, we all know Yoda. There was Yoda, but now we're introduced to Plo Koon and Ki-Adi-Mundi and,
Hmm.
Yaddle and all these other people.
Heath Koth,
Shakti, Ayla
Heath,
Secura.
Heath Koth,
Sure. I mean,
all of them. Yeah.
yeah, Quinlan Voss even, right?
Well, even our
So,
boy, uh, the guy, Kit Fisto.
yeah, right. The guy that always smiles after he
Smiles.
does something. Totally infectious smile, too. So you meet all these people. And then, of course, in Attack of the Clones, you start to meet a few of their Padawans. But for the most part, it wasn't really expanded until you get into the Clone Wars. And then you start meeting a bunch of these other people, too. So I have a feeling that what we're going to do is we're going to end up seeing a lot of books where maybe it's more of an ensemble type of thing. Maybe there'll be some where they just deal with one or two characters. But again, you have to figure out, well, where do you start in all of this? And I think that overall, they did a fairly good job, I think, of introducing the world to us in a very succinct type of a plot, right? Like they didn't give us some like crazy intricate thing. I mean, it was very simple. It's like, okay, you're in the Jedi trials, little emergency pops up. Turns out we inadvertently caused the emergency. We have to make it right. And then, hey, guess what? You did a great job, so now you're a Jedi Knight. Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's very self-contained, succinct, very easy to follow thing. But I don't think that that's what we should expect going forward, though.
Right.
And they've already set some of this stuff up, which I thought that they did brilliantly. So, again, if you guys haven't checked this out, you really should. Now, do you or and anybody in the audience that's watching live, certainly chime in the comment section too. Feel free. But what are your final thoughts on this issue, and maybe the High Republic era as a whole?
My final thoughts. I'm just waiting. I'm waiting to see how the story evolves. I'm waiting to find out about the Nile and how they, their whole purpose and what their capabilities are to be able to take on the Jedi at this point, because they are in their prime. So, like, are they kind of like the Yuuzhan Vong? Are they kind of, what are they like? So I'm really curious to see how that plays out, and I'm really curious to see, what Yoda's role is once we get into it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, first of all, I'm a little disappointed that my man Greystorm, is that his name?
Yeah,
He was not featured in this at all. But I mean, I
probably in that
remember,
book though.
yeah, Ronaldo, I think Friday when we were talking
Yeah.
about the High Republic a little, I think he said, "Hey, your boy Greystorm's in the book." So cool. I will say this as a final thought: this did make me want to read the book more. I mean, don't get me wrong. Not that I didn't want to read the book. I did. I mean, everybody knows that we've been chomping at the bit. I mean, we were supposed to get this back in June. But because of COVID and all this other stuff, it was pushed up. So I've really been looking forward to this. So the comic was an easier thing for me to do because I don't really want to abandon the Thrawn book and, go to this. I mean, I've done that before, but I didn't really want to do that yet. So this is a really good kind of scratch that itch for me. And it made me really excited about seeing the High Republic and where it was going to go. So I'm really looking forward to that. Like you said, Yoda's role in all this, I think that that's going to prove to be the bridge between this era and, of course, the next era, which I think is the Fall of the Jedi. I think that that's what they call it. And that basically encompasses the prequels.
Yep.
So that's going to be cool. I'm really curious to meet the rest of these Padawans and Masters, too, because I think that there's a lot of story they can tell. And I think it's also going to tell us a little bit more about the Jedi and how they were at their zenith, because we've never, I guess you can sort of count the Old Republic, but they were sort of even at war with the Sith back then. We never really just saw the Jedi left to their own devices.
Right.
What would the Jedi be like if there was no real threat? Now, granted, I get it. There are some enemies. There is a real threat here, but it is going to be interesting, like you said, because, this threat, I mean, how powerful they got to be if the Jedi are basically at the peak of their power.
Right.
And what's really going to be intriguing to me is, are they Force users or non-Force users?
Mm-hmm.
Because if they're dark side users, which presumably they would be if they're Force users, then how do they compare to the Sith? Because that's what everybody is going to do. Everybody is going to look back and go, well, okay, how are these guys like the Sith? Because the Sith are the pretty much
enemy.
Yes, and the prototypical, whenever you think the dark side of the Force, that's who you're thinking of. You're not thinking of the Dathomir witches. You're not thinking of
acolytes or anything
anything like that. You're thinking full-blown Sith. So that'll be interesting. Another thing that I'm really curious about is I want to get a little bit more of my bearings about where I am in the universe. See, I know that this Starlight Beacon thing is kind of like in the Outer Rim, and they're trying to, help guide and stuff like that, but I'm not entirely sure where all this stuff is taking place. We've been introduced to a lot of planets in Star Wars. So, kind of, I get it. They're trying to probably distance themselves a little bit from that, but that's cool. I don't need to go back to Hoth or Endor or Coruscant or any of that stuff, but, it would be nice if maybe I knew where these planets were in relation to those, just so I have a little bit of a bearing.
Yeah, I think we might get a chance to see Tatooine, because that's still
Well, I mean, it's not like the planets weren't there. I mean, but
right. And I'm just saying we might still see those familiar things just later on.
Sure. Well, in Coruscant, you would think we would have to, because that's pretty much where the Republic was. And I mean, I doubt that they just. I mean, granted, they could have, but I don't think that they relocated. But we'll have to see, because how far is this gonna is this gonna basically, like you were saying, is it gonna basically be in the Outer Rim, or maybe we'll see a Tatooine, or is it gonna take place all over? So just getting my bearings of where I am in the galaxy would be nice. That is definitely one of the things that I'm looking forward to when it comes to this series. Other than that, I just have to say that, and I'm sure that you feel the same way, I just want good stories. With compelling characters. That's all you got to do for me. I'm pretty easy when it comes to satisfying me, really, in any way, because that's really all I expect from any franchise or any film. Just give me a well-done film that has a compelling story, and I'm the same way with the books, I'm the same way with comics, everything else. All right, so I think that that's going to wrap up our show for this week. If you guys like this video and you want to see more stuff, hit that subscribe button. Hit the like button. Support the channel. Hit the notification bell, because we do release content. We stream live twice a week now. We're on Mondays at 8. We're also on Fridays at 8. Our Monday at 8 is usually kind of a looser type of a show like this is. We'll probably, when the next issue of High Republic comes out, we'll review that too. if you guys have any topic suggestions for any of our show, be sure to put them in the comments section, and we'll fit them in either to our Friday or Monday show. So other than that, we really hope that you guys will come back. And this Friday, we're going to be talking about The Mandalorian Season 3. It's a possibility that George Lucas might be way more involved in it than what was previously thought. So that's going to be our main topic for Friday. So come back and join us then at 8 o'clock. And other than that, I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And may the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.